unless you've got a physical bruise, you're not sure of if what's happening to you is really happening to you. And because of the tactics abusers use in coercive control relationships, you question your own sanity. So you're going to question everything that you feel, everything that feels wrong. You're questioning. You start pointing the finger back at yourself. It's me, it's not them. And you try and change yourself. So you lose your sense of autonomy and you lose your sense of self.
You are very welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. We are delighted to have you here today. This is where we talk about the reality of managing people in a modern workplace, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Wherever you are, please be sure to like, follow, or subscribe. We'd be ever so grateful. So, Hayley, thank you so much for joining me today. I know myself and yourself have known each other for the last three and a half years at this stage. And I really wanted to talk to you because you do so much valuable work supporting men and women through domestic violence, coercive control situations, exiting relationships, divorce in those situations, sometimes or separation. And particularly in the court system, and obviously with Women's Refuge as well, and supporting women who have to exit the home. And it's about 2 years now in Ireland since we have introduced domestic violence leave into legislation. And that's great. It's opened up a conversation, but it hasn't necessarily opened up an education. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of that in the workplace, do you just want to give the listeners a little bit of the background in relation to how you've ended up doing this kind of work and what it is that you do? Because I think most probably won't know
What we do.
what you do.
How I got into doing the work that I do, I think I've always had an interest in helping people. I've always had an interest. I suppose it comes down to your own childhood and your own experiences. You kind of, you sway towards an area that fits who you are. And for me, it's always been that I wanted to help people. I wanted to prevent pain and support people. So through that, I ended up doing psychology, and my kids were young, and a girl I was doing the course with, her mother was a volunteer up in the Bray Women's Refuge in Bray. So I applied for a panel job up there and loved it. It opened my eyes. When I went in originally, I didn't know either. I didn't know what a refuge was, what supports were offered, and it just opened my world. It opened my way of thinking and my way of understanding. But the compassion that I have for the people that access the service I can't even put into words. So from there, then I worked up in the refuge for a long time, then left and worked with kids in care then for 10 years, which was another experience. And I think I could see that domestic abuse flowed into all areas of trauma. I could see it through kids who were in care. They would talk about their family life and mum and dad, or dad not being present, or even mum not being present, and the impact that had on them. And it gave me the drive to go back to working with the domestic abuse. So I did, and I went back to Bray Women's Refuge, which was the home of where I started. And then this job became available, the outreach coordinator, and it was a new role. I'm very privileged. So it was a new role, and without over self-disclosing, I had also been through a lot. I'd been through a marriage. I had left a marriage. I'd been through the court system. And I realized the gaps that were there. I realized the supports that would have been there that would have helped me to go through the court system and go through certain things that I was going through. And when the position became available, I had the privilege of developing a system that would eliminate barriers that I seen. And yeah, it's grown since then. So I'm in this role now 11 years. I started off with just me as outreach coordinator, running around and meeting people and trying to meet with agencies and stuff. And then now there's a team of 6 of us that work on the outreach team that cover the whole County Wicklow. And I think one of the main areas that I wanted to really concentrate on was the court system. Going to court is such a scary thing to do. And we're dealing with people that we once loved, that we walked down the aisle to, said our vows to, had children with, have that emotional connection with. So navigating the legal system with the emotional connection makes it even tougher. It's not a stranger. So, and then it's language. So we were very lucky down in Bray Court. At the time, the court manager gave us a court support office where we could meet with victims of a domestic abuse that needed to come to court to see court orders. And we supported them because previous to that, you were just given a form and told to fill it out and go and see the judge. That in itself, you don't even understand. What do you mean I have to fill this out and go and see the judge? And what does this language mean? So when my colleague came on board, Elaine, we both went back to college and did law to get a deeper understanding of the legal system, because it's black and white and our lives aren't black and white. It is grey in the middle of it, to further support women and men. And so we were giving the right information and we'd understand it from the different sides. So we'd understand it from the victim side, but also the frustrations from the legal side, because I think what I've come to realize is that we're relying on a legal system to fix the social problem. So it's like a square peg round hole. It doesn't fit. So the more preparation and the more understanding and knowledge, because power is knowledge. So the more knowledge that we can give people coming to court, the more power they have over what happens, because their understanding of it is widened. And so we do that. And then we also have outreach clinics around County Wicklow, because there's so many women and men that would be told, you know, they're not sure of what and that's the thing about domestic abuse and coercive control. Unless you've got a physical bruise, you're not sure of if what's happening to you is really happening to you. And because of the tactics abusers use in coercive control relationships, you question your own sanity. So you're going to question everything that you feel, everything that feels wrong. You're questioning. You start pointing the finger back at yourself. It's me, it's not them. And you try and change yourself. So you lose your sense of autonomy and you lose your sense of self.
Yes.
So to have a safe place, to have a soundboard, to talk about what's happening at home in a very safe place, that you're not disclosing it to families, you're not disclosing it to employers, or you haven't made that decision. And so we would do that, meet with victims, and it's all on their pace and it's their safe place to come and talk. And we would explore tactics, explore the cycle of abuse, and really explore how they can gain back a tiny bit of power, piece by piece by piece, until they're ready to make the decisions to leave. So it's a huge service. We also do support groups. We run the On My Life program, which is a 12-week program, an evidence-based psychological program of how to get your sense of self back after leaving an abusive relationship. So it's quite comprehensive. We're very fluid. We're not rigid. So if we see a gap, if we see a challenge, I'm very privileged with the team that I have. They all have the same amount of compassion and drive that I have, which is great. Sometimes I need to put reins on and go, come back, girls. We need to just slow things down a bit. But we are working with crisis and we change with the crises. And we do whatever we can to eliminate as many challenges for women and men that are experiencing domestic abuse and coercive control.
I think, over the years, we've got to know each other because I've supported somebody through this situation and I've seen firsthand the amazing work that you do. But I've learned a lot more about coercive control, nowhere near what you've learned. But one of the really interesting things to me about it is that oftentimes there's what's called love bombing. So somebody makes you feel like you're $1 million, the most perfect person on the planet. It's all amazing. And then coercive control is like a death by a thousand cuts. So there's not necessarily any one thing that happens that's particularly big, or that if you explain, he did this or she did that, it's not necessarily that somebody will go, oh, well, that's abuse, but it's the sort of it's the buildup of all the incremental things over time, and then alongside that goes the erosion of perhaps relationships with your family, with your friends, and your own self-confidence. So that belief in yourself to identify it.
Yeah.
So how, bringing it back, I suppose, a little bit towards the workplace, how do you think employers might see that in the workplace if they have somebody who's going through that? How might it present?
I suppose it would if a woman is in or a man is in a coercive controlled relationship and they're coming into the workplace, and if this is employee who might be in a relationship or, has suddenly started a relationship, you have a working relationship with them. So you get to know them personally. You definitely do notice signs. You would notice them arriving late. They're not consistent with their work. They'd be in work, they're there, but they're not there. Their performance would go down. They would stop going on lunch dates. They wouldn't be in photographs to do with work on social events. They could be checking their phone all the time, answering phone calls. They could be jumpy, Yeah, childcare, ringing in, not coming in to work when they should be coming in, you know, meeting deadlines, very emotional. The signs are, it's very, very difficult, I suppose, for an employer because you're also walking on a very thin line that there could be something else going on and is not a domestic abuse, but it is about looking out for the signs without approaching. So definitely it would be the phone calls, being late for work, not performing, not reaching deadlines, taking time off, leaving early, all those type of things because they could be late because the abuser controls the car, so they mightn't have access to the car. The abuser might have decided that they're not going to mind the kids today and said he was going to mind the kids. And it's also post-separation abuse. It's not, they mightn't just be in the relationship. And I think it's very important for employers to have an understanding of post-separation abuse. A lot of people have the perspective, oh, when you've left the relationship, so the abuse stops. That's not what we see. A lot of the time, the abuse will escalate when they leave the relationship because the abuser's lost control. And then you go into a whole different minefield of navigating post-separation abuse because you're even more powerless over it. Relying on access plans. So you build your work around access. He doesn't turn up for access. You've got no childcare, or else he drops the kids back early. You've to leave work to go and get the kids. He's to collect the kids from school. So it's it would present as someone who is very disorganized and very emotional and, constantly checking their phone, constantly answering personal phones, really isolating themselves from the team. So it would be a combination of everything. So it wouldn't be the one, because I suppose coercive control, as you said, it is a combination of things. An isolated incident is hard to go, yeah, that's coercive control. And I suppose it would be the same manifestation in work. Like, so if someone arrives in late, that doesn't mean they're in an abusive relationship. But if someone arrives in late, leaves early, checking the phone all the time, even the way they dress will change. So if
Yeah.
you've someone coming into work, say, for example, I wear a high neck and like, this is how I dress. But if I didn't dress like this and I would suddenly change how I'm dressing, so I wouldn't be taking pride in how I look because I could be leaving for work and he's there, oh, who are you going into work to impress? Are you having affairs? And so I would change who I am to try and mold myself into the person that my abuser wants me to be so I don't get abused, and I'm trying to stay within those goalposts. So I'd come in and I would be dressed down and I mightn't have makeup on and my hair mightn't be done. So it really is an employer taking notice of their staff, because I think we can turn a blind eye to those little red flags like we do when we're in an abusive relationship. We can see the red flags, but it's easier from an outsider looking in to see them rather than the person themselves seeing them.
Yes, yeah, definitely is easier from the outside, I think.
Yeah, 100% easier. 100%. And then even navigating that, like navigating that conversation. How do I sit and have this conversation with somebody? If you've got a very strong working relationship, it is, you can bring it up, I'm worried or
Yeah.
I'm concerned, but sometimes that's not always possible.
Yeah, and I think, you can lots of organizations will have employee assistance programs, they might do mental health training, but it could be that an employer might do like a domestic violence awareness day for all staff or something to start having that conversation, because there's a lot of women that I've met, and men actually, who it's only when they're heading towards the point at which would they want to leave the relationship, or afterwards and they're looking back reflecting, they're like, oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's what that means, because when they were in it, they didn't see it. So by having the conversation, by talking about all of the different aspects of what it might look like, then it can help somebody to identify and say, well, that happens to me, and that happens to me, and that happens to me. And they're saying that this is abuse. And maybe I need to go talk to somebody. Maybe I need to go to counseling. Maybe I need to look this up or do a bit of research myself. So it doesn't have to be targeted at Hayley or at Louisa, but you could do something for the wider group and have it be a safe conversation.
Definitely. But it's also, I think, even going back to like Evan Stark is the founder of coercive control, and coercive control is very new in Ireland. Like, it only came into legislation in 2018. So even as practitioners, we're still navigating coercive control, although it's against the law, but we're still navigating how do you prove coercive control. The Gardaí are still navigating how do I prove coercive control. The courts are still navigating how do we prove coercive control. So if it's that hard to prove, and that, we're all still navigating it, we're 7 years into it now. Well, then for an organisation to navigate it is difficult. It is like what you said, it is raising the conversation. It's raising awareness within the office about a domestic abuse. Having posters in the women's toilets, behind the toilet, behind the door, is always a really good thing, because if a woman or a man is feeling emotional, they're going to retract to the toilet, and they're going to they're going to sit in the toilet. I even do it in work. When
Yeah,
I
we all do that. Wait, you don't have to be in a really big crisis to have to just go and hide.
No, and we all need places to hide. If an office environment is, and it is about the culture of the office, and it is about the environment of the office, and I do see a huge shift in changes over the last few years, of even with the introduction of the employment assistance program, and more employers are really getting into mental health. Like, it's not just about domestic abuse, it's about mental health and the well-being of their team, and they can see the benefits. So even having posters behind the toilet doors in the men and women's toilets, just kind of saying, like, this is not okay. It's like the Me Too campaign. This is not okay to be happening to you. We are here to support you. This is the culture that we're going to create within this office environment. We challenge each other's behaviors, because we can even see it in the office environment that we can get complacent about how we communicate with each other and go, no, that's not okay. That's not okay what you're doing. Because if you might even have, it might be the other end of the coin. You might see an employee who's male or female who's talking bad about their partner, or she better do this. And it is about challenging each other. It is about going, no, that's not okay to do that. No, mate, I don't agree with that. So if it's a very male dominant environment, like if it's a building site, or I know there's loads of equality and women working on them as well, which is phenomenal. But these male dominant work environments, and I'm always saying it to my partner, because he works in a male dominant environment. Hope if you ever hear one of your colleagues speaking bad about their wife or their ex-partners, or she's looking for maintenance off me and da da da, and I hope you're challenging that and saying, you know what, mate, no, you should pay for your children. You should be taking them on access. So it is about starting to create a culture the same way as the Me Too campaign, and the same way as all the wolf whistling and sexual assault and how we treat each other. It is about creating that environment that we can do that within the workplace as well. And it is, like you said, there's loads of days. We've got the 16 days of activism against violence against women. Then it's the end of October, beginning November. We've got the Go Purple Day, which is tomorrow, which is run by An Garda Síochána, where they go around and highlight the services that they have. And that was a beautiful initiative by a female member of An Garda Síochána, that was like, no, the guards need to do more as well about being open and transparent, and saying we are here to support victims. Because that in itself going into report to the Gardaí is a huge barrier, you know.
It's very intimidating. And you're brought into an interrogation room because that's the
Yeah.
only place that they can bring you that's private. So it's very intimidating. But I have to say that I've had to go to the guards about a few different situations, both in supporting somebody personally, but also through work, and through individuals in the workplace that I've had to support in different situations. And, you know, I mean, I only deal with the guards really around Wicklow, but I have found them to be absolutely fantastic. They're not perfect. They don't get it right all the time, but they have the right intention.
Yeah, you're 100%.
And it's a very complex area, so they're not going to get it right and they're not going to understand everything. But they certainly made it feel like a safe place to go. And anybody out there who is in a situation that's unsafe, I would personally strongly recommend that they just give them their trust. And if they break it, they can deal with that, but try, because they
And
want.
we've seen that, Louise. We've seen, and another thing that we've done, which was a barrier, that we seen that women were apprehensive of going down to the Garda station to make a statement because they didn't know who was going to be behind the hatch. And as you said, and I think on Garda Síochána don't get enough credit for, number one, they're not, you could, a guard could be dealing with a road traffic incident, then go to a domestic violence incident in a house, then go and tell some poor unfortunate person that their loved one has passed away, then go deal with. So they're not dealing with separate entities, they're dealing with them all together. So what we've done is we have an amazing inspector in Wicklow, Colin Carrigan, who's very pro domestic abuse, and we've got great support from Garda Síochána. I have to say, within Wicklow, we're very, very, very lucky. And we now have a clinic in our outreach office that a lovely member of Garda Síochána, Emma Jane, who's done training on coercive control. So if you're like, I just want to talk to a guard and just tell them what's going on without that fear of knocking on the hatch, going into a statement, you can come into our office and meet with Emma Jane and have a cup of coffee in a very therapeutic environment that is safe, and she's just there to listen. And she will red flag and say, do you know what? Maybe start keeping a journal of stuff, because coercive control, Evan Stark describes it as being a hostage. And that's the simplest way to describe it. You know, they control your movement, they control your money, they control your communication, they control your parenting, they control your social life, they control your emotions. And as you even said at the beginning, this isn't done all at once. This is done over time.
Yes.
Little things like, you know, oh, your friends don't really care about you much, to then it's planting the seed and letting the tree grow inside a victim's head. And let me be very, very clear. It doesn't matter what you do, what your education is, how much you are educated about a domestic abuse, everyone can fall victim. And I think we've seen that over the media in the last few months, with amazing women coming forward and, you know, waiving their right to anonymity and bringing this to the public forum. Because to be a member of Garda Síochána and be able to say how that impacted her. And we have got clients who are members of Garda Síochána. We have clients who are solicitors. We have clients who are barristers. We have clients who are doctors, nurses, psychotherapists, you name it. Uh, I would never underestimate the power an abuser has on a victim. And I'm never not shocked by tactics or methods to keep control over their victim.
Look, I think that's breaking down that stereotype is really important, because so many people have a picture in their head, whether it's from TV or movies or their background or their, whatever it is, of this is what an abuser looks like and this is what a victim looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And they're probably wrong on both
They're
counts.
100% wrong. They are 1,000,000% wrong.
Yeah.
I call them the Christian Grey abusers. That's what I call them. I'd say, oh, he's a Christian Grey. You know, oh
Yes.
my God, from the outside, they're just like, yeah,
Gorgeous. Yeah.
gorgeous.
Yeah. And they're
It's
very believable.
believable. And then another, I suppose, is that like reactive abuse. And that's really come to the forefront. And you might even see that in the workplace. You know, a victim might come across as very abusive, very reactive, very, that might be the only situation that she can control. She might be very like, no, it has to be done this way and pedantic. And it's like, okay, why? But that's the only thing she's got control of is within her workplace. It might be also going for really going up there to prove herself, overachieving, overdoing everything, burning the candle at both ends, because work is the only place she actually has to breathe and actually be herself,
Yes.
So there's so many different sides to it when you really look into it. There's so many different sides to.
I think that point, though, Hayley, is really important because whilst a victim of domestic abuse may have attendance issues and timekeeping and, all of those other things, they could also be your best employee,
Yeah,
working the hardest.
yeah,
And I think one of the things, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong here, but one of the signs for me, if it is that person who is the high performer, who is doing all the right things, there's no performance issues, no attendance issues, etc. It can be really simple things like, are they ever able to go on a work night out? Or do they ever talk about going out with their friends? Is it really that their world is work and home, and that there's no sort of space for them within that? And I think that's an element where that's how it might show up, perhaps. I don't know if you would agree or if I've missed the mark.
No, I totally agree. And even for me, for example, being told that, you'd be nothing without this other person, or you'll never achieve anything, you'll never be good enough, no one will ever, like, these are things that you're told, right? These are things that go into your head that change your thought processes. You believe that you're not lovable, that no one's going to take you seriously, that you're nothing without them, you'll never survive without them. And this can go into post-separation abuse as well, because you come out of the abusive relationship and you go, I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to prove them wrong. I am worthy. I am able to do stuff. And then you become so obsessed with that your life becomes that, of proving yourself. And it is that high achiever, and it's, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do this and work, 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 work. And like you said, you have no life, and they don't talk about anything. And if you ask them about their home life, or if you ask them about what's going on at home, and I'm very mindful, it's a very grey area for employees to do, because you got the workplace relations that they question me. So employers are kind of walking on this mattress as well as, what do I talk about? How do I approach this? Could I be accused, especially if it's the male-female dynamics? Could I be accused of something here that I'm not doing? I'm only really trying to ask if they're okay. Like bringing in like the mental health awareness days, bringing in people to do talks. And we even do it in our own organization and talk about boundaries, and bring in a psychotherapist to do work with the staff, because you have that vicarious trauma, you have loads of stuff that goes on. So it is about bringing the outside into the workplace to open people's minds within the workplace that this actually can happen, and that these are actually signs, and that there is support there for people, and how do we see those signs?
I think as an employer, it's very, very difficult to open up that conversation with an employee. And I've had one person working in a beauty salon, very evident that there was abuse going on. There was bruises, all of the signs were there. But it was still almost impossible to open up the door to the conversation if the person didn't want the door to be opened. But one thing I do think that an employer can do is, if somebody comes to you and says that there's coercive control or abuse going on, just believe them. Just believe them. And you know what, if you believe them and it's not going on and they're pulling the wool over your eyes, that's fine, because the person who's telling you the truth deserves your support. And so support them all. Just believe them. Don't question them. Don't prejudge. Just sort of say, how do we help?
Yeah.
What do we do? And I think that provides that safe space.
And another thing that people fall into, and I think is the biggest challenge and especially for people when they disclose, like the biggest fear about disclosing that you're in an abusive relationship is, I need to do something now, right? So someone comes and discloses that they're in an abusive relationship. Our first response is to, okay, well, how do we get you out of it? How do we do this? And and then you've got people from the outside coming in, existential influences coming in, and you're like, now I've just got someone else telling me what to do. You know, it's very important that if someone comes to you and says, like that girl that was in the beauty salon and blah, 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 her colleagues probably would have got, excuse French, a bit pissed off. Or
Yeah.
she's coming in, she's talking about this, she's not doing nothing about it, she just keeps going back to him. Then we can fall into victim blaming, which is even more dangerous than what the abuse actually is. Because if we're going to blame the victim and put the responsibility on the victim to fix all the problems and leave the relationship and solve everything, well, then what was once a safe place for her becomes another place of abuse, because she's going in and her colleagues are like, oh, look at her again, coming in with a bruise. You think she'd just leave him? You think she'd just do this? Then you become the gossip of the office, or you become the gossip of your employment. And then you feel judged. And then you have the regret of, you know what, I shouldn't have even opened my mouth because it's not worth it. I shouldn't have said anything. Why would
Or I
I
should
say
leave
anything?
the job, and then you don't have your financial security.
Exactly. And that could be what he wants as well. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of, I worked with a woman and she was amazing. And he used to target her job. No one in her workplace knew this. And phone call, text, answer your phone, answer your phone, answer your phone. If you don't answer your phone, I'm going to come to your workplace. And that was her straight away. She'd go into the toilet, answer the phone, make up an excuse. The kids were sick. She needed to leave the office to drive to see if he was actually coming. Now, he might never have come to the office, but that somatic reaction that she was having inside of her, I'm actually feeling a bit of it now, to be honest, because
Fear.
the fear of, he's going to come to my workplace, and I've experienced that and I've seen it firsthand. There was a lady that I was working with and she had to get a police escort one night coming home from work because her ex-husband was like, I'm going to be waiting at the side of the road and you watch, you're going to be driving by. No one's going to know I'm coming and I'm going to side, and he was at this all day when she was in work. So how is she going to concentrate in work when the messages are coming in, the threatening messages? Now, this was post-separation abuse. She wasn't in the relationship at the time. But how's she going to concentrate in work? He could ring the job and start vicious rumours about her. We've had women where they've threatened to, send naked images to their boss, really derogatory things that puts the fear into women. How are you going to leave that? Like, you tell me, if you are in an abusive relationship and you disclose that you're in an abusive relationship, but your abuser knows your biggest vulnerables, your biggest fears, and is inside your head so much that he doesn't even need to do anything. He just needs to give you a look, send you a text message, and your body goes into fight, flight, freeze. You go into the somatic response that you have no physical control over. The fear is that bad. How can you leave that?
One thing I would say, if you were sitting in front of me in this situation asking for advice as a HR person, not as someone
Yeah.
who supports people in these situations, I would really, unless you're in a workplace that has its own sort of, issues going on, if you're in any sort of a normal workplaces, and the majority are, my personal advice would be pick, whether it's your line manager or the boss or the CEO, somebody who's more senior than you, who you can trust a little bit, and tell them. Because I have come across situations whereby an abuser has sent an email with images, with
Mm.
content, with all kinds of horrible stuff to a director of a business. But because the director was aware of the situation, they never opened the email because they don't
Yeah.
want to look at it. They're not trying to invade your privacy. But if they know that this person is out there, what this person's name is, that this person is intending to harm you, then they will do whatever they need to do to protect you. And I've seen employers put security guards in place, put plans in place in terms of, okay, well, you're not going to walk back to the car on your own. A colleague will always walk back with you. You'll never be in the office on your own at nighttime or, in the evening even. So there's lots of things that an employer can do. And I've seen that
There's
firsthand
loads.
multiple times,
Yeah.
but it's having the trust, and you have to kind of be vulnerable to give that trust over. And it's almost even more difficult if you're really senior and you've become really powerful in your job and you don't want to be seen as weak. male or female. But to get the support that you need, you have to, you cannot do it on your own. It does take a village. And so you have to let people in. And if you let them in my experience, they will try and help. They might not get it right, but they will try and help.
And I think that's a really, really important thing, is making sure if any employer is here listening, is looking at your team and saying, identifying one supportive person,
Yes.
send them on training. There's amazing training out there. I know Women's Aid do amazing training. If they are in Wicklow and they'd like me to come in, or they'd like them to come and meet me to do that training piece on a one-to-one basis. So you have someone on the team that, you can say this person is trained and can look out for the signs, someone senior,
Yes.
and it's having the right things to say. There's a reason why it's the right things to say and not being judgmental. We have a very, not funny saying, but we have a saying that we say to all women, knowledge is power. Okay. The more knowledge you have, the more power you have. The more knowledge you give your abuser, the more power he has. And we would always encourage women and men that if something is happening in work, to go and talk to your employer, to pick one identified person to go and talk to. You're not asking them to be your counsellor. You're not asking them to be a psychotherapist. And we always say they can't let you go because of it.
No,
If you're
and they
open,
won't want to.
and they won't want to be able to sit with somebody and say, look, I'm not getting into it. And the employer doesn't ask the details. As you said, it's about honesty and it's about believing your employees. Your employees aren't going to pull the wool over your eyes. They're not saying this to say, do you know what? I want to be late for work. You don't need to give the details. You can say, to be able to identify, look, I'm having a really tough time at home. Myself and my husband or wife have separated. We're living in the same house because this is a thing that happens. You're living under the same roof because of the housing crisis. You're waiting for court dates to come up. It's not like it was years ago. So post-separation abuse now amalgamates because you haven't got the disconnect. So you've the chance of trauma bonding, you've the chance of so much stuff getting back into a relationship, and you're just trying to navigate this. But to sit with someone within a workplace and say, do you know what, look, I'm going through a really tough time at home. I don't want to get into it. There is the employment system program there, but I'm going through a really tough time and we're trying to navigate access. We're going to court. That in itself tells you there's something going on, that you've got an employee going to court. To not ask questions, to not interrogate, is to believe them and say, do you know what? We're here if you need us. We can come up with, we can be flexible. So if you need to drop the kids to school, start work at 9:30.
Yeah, exactly. Just that little bit of wriggle room.
A little bit of wiggle room to start work at 9:30. You know what? Let's go out for lunch. Let's start opening up that social circle within the workplace. Little things, just being mindful, giving them the time off work to go to court. I know we spoke about the new laws and we'll get into that now in a minute, but even going to court, it's not, you don't get an appointment, and you don't get an appointment to go to court. You're there from 9:30 till 5, and your case mightn't even get heard. It'll be adjourned, and it'll be adjourned, and it'll be adjourned. And it could be a court date once a month for 5, 6, 7 months. Now, if someone's taking that from annual leave, where's their time? It is mental health, well-being days, all that kind of stuff. But if their annual leave is being consumed by court, and then they don't get the holidays and they don't get stuff. So I think it's very important for employers not to interrogate, not to question, not to give advice, because they don't know. And the wrong advice, which we both have experienced, can be the make or break of whether I'm going to disclose this again, or because coercive control and domestic abuse, unless you've got a bruise to prove that it's happening, you self-doubt yourself and you self-question. And if someone's asking you to prove it or give me examples, you're going to again go into that self-doubt and self-belief of what you're experiencing is actually abuse. So we want to eliminate that. We want to create a safe, supportive, non-judgmental environment that our employees can come to us and say, this is what's happening. And then we're flexible around that and support them in any way. And if it does become evident then in a couple of months' time that, you know what, there's more to this, then you go to your HR person. in with HR anyway.
Of course.
But then you go and say, can we do this? Can we navigate this together? Or, you know what, we kind of need to pull this back a little bit because it's gone on too long if it's really impacting. But you know what? We survived through COVID of hybrid work. And, you know, I think we learned an awful lot through COVID about being in the office.
Yeah, there's always a solution.
Yeah, there's always a solution. But then the other side of that there could be domestic abuse, someone wanting to work hybrid all the time because they're not allowed to go to the office. So it is a very thin, it's a very, 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 for every solution, that could be a red flag. So it is very, very, very difficult, you know?
I think you mentioned court there, and one thing that until you see it, it's hard to believe, or you're not going to think of it. So in a situation where there is domestic abuse going on, it's all in camera, which
Yeah.
means that the general public are not allowed into the room. And so in those situations, it would not be uncommon for the victim to have to go in and give a statement on their own with no legal support, with no family member. I mean, yourself and Elaine and the team go in and hold the person's hand, male or female, but
Yep.
they're on their own in that room with the person who has hurt them and abused them, who is saying that they're lying. And the person who has abused them will typically have a legal team. They might have a solicitor, junior counsel, senior. They could have 4 or 5 people in supporting them, calling you a liar. They're allowed to interrogate you, but the person on your side who is allowed to ask them questions is not a solicitor, is not a barrister, has some degree of legal training because they're a guard and they're very good at what they do, but they do not have the same level of legal training. So the balance of equity in that situation, or equality, is so skewed, and it is so traumatizing or re-traumatizing for a victim. And I know that the various judges in the courts, and they try very hard to provide the support, but the fundamental system is not supportive. And so if somebody is in that situation and they're going into court and they're doing that, it's not like you're walking up to pay a parking fine. You
No.
know, the person's not sleeping for days beforehand. They're certainly not sleeping the day afterwards. Their body might go into shutdown. And that when they do sleep, they might sleep for 20 hours to kind of recover without waking up because of all of the hormones and what have you that go on. So it isn't about, I need 3 hours to go to court because I've got an appointment. That's not what it is. It's a process, and it's a chunk of time, and it's in the middle of the week, and it's never on the days that work. And so it's tricky for an employer and to manage that, and it's tricky for an employee to ask for help. But I keep coming back to the only way that it works is where the employee and the employer have a relationship of trust and communication.
Hugely.
You know.
Definitely. Like the trust and communication, but that's the foundation of everything. Even if we go back to, you know, if you look at psychotherapy and psychology and Carl Rogers and, you know, congruence, empathy, I think you have to come back to that with everything. It doesn't matter what your business is, whether it's a building site, coffee shop, even our service. Like I'm mindful. We've got one male on the team. I feel sorry for him, but we're women dominated, and one of my team could be in an abusive relationship. I need to look out for those red flags. One of the court staff could be in an abusive relationship. I need to be mindful of what I'm saying, how I'm articulating myself when I'm talking about sensitive issues. When I'm talking, like what you're talking about going to court, you know, I'm mindful of how difficult it is to go to court, but I'm also mindful of how empowering it is to go to court.
Yes.
Court can be extremely daunting. A lot of women and men are put off from the system. We always say this isn't about winning or losing, which you probably heard us say, Louise.
Yep.
This is not about winning or losing. It doesn't matter what he has, whether he has junior counsel, senior counsel, and we've seen that, them coming in with these big, that's why I call them the Christian Greys, the suits, the whole people around them. When it becomes a criminal case, this is the thing of Irish law, and we've seen this in legislation as well, and we've heard victims really advocate for this. You're the victim, but you're also the witness. So you're not entitled to legal representation. And this is whether it's coercive control, sexual assault, rape, historical abuse. anything like a breach of an order. If you have a domestic violence order and that's breached, it then goes into the criminal system. And what happens when you go into the criminal system is you're silenced because you are the victim and you're also the witness. So you have to sit there and listen to exactly what you just described. Senior counsel basically using the same words as what your abuser used. There's something wrong with you, they're psychologically wrong, they're worried about your mental health, you're suffering postnatal depression, you've been let go from your job, and all this stuff. You're sitting in court listening. And you have to just remain silent. And we do a lot of work with people going into court in those situations to prepare them for this. And they come out and they say, "Hey, how did you know all that was going to be said?" I'm like, because you know what? The good thing about perpetrators is they're predictable, right? That's why there's so many books about them, right? They are predictable. I could sit and say, I'd hear a woman disclose a story and I'd say, right, this is going to happen. You do this, this is going to happen. You know, we're 90% right? Tip wood, God, no one's ever been murdered. That's linked in with our service. But they are very predictable. So if we can create a cushioning around, and that's why knowledge is power. I go back to that. They have the knowledge, they have the power. But going into a court setting, it's about your voice being heard. It doesn't matter who believes you in that courtroom. Your abuser knows what you're saying is the truth. And he can say whatever he wants, but he knows deep down inside in his gut that you're telling the truth. It doesn't matter what the judge thinks, what his barristers, legal team, they're just going to fit his ego to his legal team, which is why he would hire a certain legal team to fill their ego and agree with their narrative. The judge's job is black and white, and this is where I come to the social legal problem, is that the judge's job is there enough evidence here to prove what you're saying? And that's where your voice comes in, because you need to look at the judge and speak from the heart, speak from the stomach. He or she is human. And if you're trying to protect yourself and we fall victim to our own knowledge as well by using buzzwords like coercive control, gaslighting, psychological abuse, emotional abuse. But what if you can sit, and we would suggest to every victim to eliminate every TikTok video they've ever heard, all these buzzwords, pretend that the judge is an alien and you're trying to tell him, like when you go for your driving test. You know, when you go for your driving test and you have this expert sitting beside you and your driver and instructor will say, pretend he's an alien and he's never been in a car before, and your job is to show him that this is how you drive a car, following the rules of the road, etc. When you're sitting in the witness box and you're looking at the judge, you've got to look at him that very same way, that you're trying to describe to him or her what your life was like living with this man, or what happened when this person did A, B, C, or D. What happened to your body? What did your somatics say? Where did the fear come from? And that is so important, because we can be victims for our own knowledge and say, oh, well, he was coercively abusive towards me. Like, that's massive. How? You know, or he used to gaslight me. How did he gaslight you? You know, it's giving examples is the only way you can really ask a judge or ask anybody to understand what you're going through. And sometimes it's a drop that mic moment. I've had women that have come and they've been in court, and I remember one woman, and oh my God, she was phenomenal. And she looked him straight in the eye and said, "You told me you'd kill me if I ever done this. Bring it on."
God.
You know, because he told her, if you ever go to court, if you ever get me put in prison, if you ever do A, B, C, and D, I'm going to kill you. And she did it. And she went to the guards and made a statement, and she brought him
Did
to
it
court.
anyway.
And she did it anyway. And her final thing was, when she was finished giving her statement and she looked him straight in the eye, now she was shaking, and she said, "You said you'd kill me if I ever did it. Come on then, do it." So, and another thing, I suppose, employers, which is this is just up to come to my head now from this court case, is writing references for people, character references. So
This
if
has
an
come up a lot
employee,
recently.
hugely, if an employee comes to you looking for a reference for court, I'm up in court, so any chance you can write me a character reference, ask why. say, no, I'm not going to write, I'm not going to give you a reference unless you tell me. And a lot of judges are asking for this as well. They're not accepting references. With this one case, we actually had an employer come in and give evidence of what a great employee his employee was. Even though his partner, his ex-partner, was sitting up in the stand and told the judge that he had physically assaulted her, dragged her out of the house, put her in a car. She escaped the car. He followed her. She ended up in hospital for 4 days after it. The psychological abuse, everything that went on. And his employer came in and gave a character witness for what a great employee he was. And that I actually felt sorry for the employer because he didn't have a clue what he was coming into. And when he sat listening to her statement, he actually turned around and said, I actually am embarrassed that I'm here. And he did say he is a good employee and he turns up for work and he goes above and beyond, and he was in a very credible job. It wasn't a job that, when I say credible, I mean he held a high position, and his supervisor also was in a very high position. So it's looking at the clicks in work, creating that. No, we don't give references for anything unless you tell me what it was. So I can turn around and say, Hayley Murphy is after disclosing to me that she was abusive to her partner. She's made me aware of all this. I can see the change in her behaviour. She's engaged in the MEND program because there's loads of perpetrator programs. Unless you're willing to write a reference like that, where the person asking you is disclosing why they're in court, and you want to see the summons for the court before you give a reference, be very mindful of that, because we've seen it in the media with the TD that gave the reference. Like, oh my God, gobsmacked. I'm still speechless over that.
Yeah.
So these are things that employers don't really look at either. And sometimes, yeah, I'll write your reference. Yeah, you're great. Da, 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 and don't actually realize what the reference is for. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to explore, because if they're not hiding anything, they'll be straight up and honest with you.
Yeah, and if you come to HR, we'll say, tell them when they started, when they finished, or if they haven't finished, that they're still an employee and what their job is. And
And
that's
that's
it.
it. That is,
Your personal opinion is your personal opinion. It's not the opinion of the organization.
Exactly. And even if you don't have a HR department, reach out to someone like you. Reach out to a HR company that you can hire them for a while. Not everyone has a HR
Exactly.
department. I know we don't, funny enough. We don't have a HR department, but we still have HR that we can reach out to.
Exactly.
We don't have a legal team, but I know I can go to any solicitor and say, can I just run something by you?
Exactly.
Don't be afraid to do that either. There's a lot out there for employers as well as employees.
Hayley, I think we could talk all day about this. It's
Oh, yeah.
I'm conscious of time, so I will definitely come back and have another conversation with you in relation to support that can be there for employers, because I think it is it's such an important topic that isn't discussed because it's so sensitive and you don't want to say the wrong thing. So in this podcast, as you're aware, we have a little tradition where every guest is asked a question that was left by the last guest. So your question is, what is the one thing you wish you could change and the one thing you have to change in your life?
One thing I wish I could change, you know what? If you had have asked me this question 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I would have had a total different answer. I probably would have had a list. I've recently gone back to do psychotherapy. I'm in the middle of doing, and I've done a lot of work. And I think, you know what? I've no regrets. There would be nothing I would change, because all my challenges have made me the person that I am today. It has educated me in a way that I don't think I would have been educated. I think if I was to change anything, would have wished I would have started this journey way younger, of the journey of self-acceptance, self-love, not looking elsewhere to fill my emotional needs, and love myself more and be more forgiving to myself.
I think that's a lesson we could all benefit from. I think that's lovely. That's a lovely way to end. Hayley, thank you so much. And I really appreciate your time.
No problem. And thank you so much for having me on. Thank you so much for bringing this conversation into the forefront for employees, and even just having this conversation. As always, Louisa, it's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you.